Why does the government keep saying Operation Sindoor is still ongoing?
So the government has not shut down Operation Sindoor at all.
I guess the most polarizing issue during Operation Sindoor, how many jets on our side were downed?
So I don't know the actual real number because they won't talk about it.
Have you ever been in the line of sight of a gun?
I'm lucky to have survived a couple of occasions. I was standing on the banks of the Suru River in Kargil, and on top of that hill is an All India radio transmitter. And for days and days, the Pakistanis were attacking that. And then we clambered our way up that cut side, 150 meters away from the AIR tower when boom, I felt then was the searing heat coming at my face, and then you hear the sound.
Your conversation with Group Captain Kunal Kalra had fired the BrahMos missile.
If you look carefully at his account, there were 2 missiles which were fired. And so the possibility of it being a BrahMos.
During Operation Sindoor, the S-400 was mentioned several times.
People use it to refer to the entire Israeli air defense missile shield. But in fact, it's only a small part.
Have we been able to successfully avenge what happened in Pahalgam? How is a civilian allowed to be in the back of an aircraft, and how long have you been doing that?
I've flown 15 sorties on fighter aircraft, 1-5. I've flown a Sea Harrier off the deck of INS Virat. I have flown, I think, 4 sorties on variants of the Gripen, which is a Swedish fighter. I've flown on the MiG-35 a couple of times, the MiG-29 with the hero of the Soviet Union. I've flown 3 sorties on Mirage 2000 during the Kargil War, as the war was actually winding down. That remains an incredible memory because Air Marshal Tiwari, who sort of features prominently in this book, was one of the pilots in that unit, which was based out of Adampur, which conducted the strikes. And here I am interviewing him, or sort of being in a conversation with him all these decades later. Of course, he was the vice chief during Sindoor, so very relevant. I have had the opportunity of flying 3 variants of the F-16, 3 sorties on an F-18, and it all sort of adds up. And of course, I'm the first journalist to be on the LCA Tejas as well. So I've had and the Rafale, and the Rafale, which features so prominently in this book. And so aviation has always been a great passion of mine, not just military aviation, but civilian aviation as well. I'm a complete geek for military technology. I can discuss the specs of the defensive suite on board the Rafale, but that'll bore the living daylights out of your viewers. But that's something which I've done, and the way it happens is during the Kargil War, it was the Minister Pramod Mahajan, who was the late Pramod Mahajan, who was then the broadcasting minister, who sort of felt that there needed to be an Indian journalist who was allowed to get to fly with the Indian Air Force to get an idea of what they did. And the role of the Air Force was incredible. Long story short, there I was, just short of my 25th birthday, getting the ultimate birthday sort of treat. And for the next couple of days, I flew with a bunch of pilots, many of whom ended up becoming some of the most prominent pilots and officers in the Indian Air Force. One of them made deputy chief, 2 of them made vice chief. So that was one heck of an experience. And so aviation is something which I'm deeply passionate about. And I think my interest in military technology, particularly aviation technology, mated to this war which I covered. One among many. I've covered conflict throughout my career. Sort of made me decide when Chiki Sarkar approached me that, no, this is a book. I said yes to it in 10 seconds.
Wonderful. I want to ask, for clarity's sake, what is a sortie exactly? Is it a short trip?
It's a flight.
It's just a flight. It's just a flight on a military aircraft.
Yeah.
Got it. I have seen a clip of several regular people flying inside, I don't know what aircraft, it's also a military aircraft, and they all seem to become unconscious once they get hit by the G-force. Excuse my simple terms throughout the podcast because I'm not very
no worries.
sound.
I'll explain it for you.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. And then they have a World War II pilot who's about 90 years old sit inside the aircraft, and as the G force hits him, he is sitting there very calmly. I cannot imagine what that must feel like to be 25 and be sitting in the back and be hit with all this gravitational force. What is that experience like? Do they prepare you for it? Did at some
Yeah.
point uh,
So
did you faint?
when you get into a G-force scenario, and of course, if you are getting into a fighter plane, and if they are trying to give you an experience of what fighter pilots feel, then they will induce G-forces. So there are G-loading exercises, which often happens shortly after you lift off, and of course, you are trained to sort of deal with these to prevent you getting a blackout and a redout, which is far more dangerous. But you are also kitted with a G suit, so this is inflatable bladder across your legs and on your torso. And of course, you're breathing 100% oxygen. In the case of certain aircraft, like the Swedish Gripen, there is a force feed of oxygen to ensure that your lungs have the air that they need. And the way a G-force works is we are now, you and I, in a 1G environment. This is the force of gravity. The reason on Earth, the reason we are standing is because our muscles have evolved to ensure that we can move in this sort of 1G environment. The moment you move to 2G, then it effectively feels like two times your body weight distributed across your body. 3G is three times 4G. Fighter pilots get up to 9G. And I've been up to 9G as well, but just for 2 or 3 seconds. And fighter pilots also, they don't do that for a great deal of time. And to prevent you from fainting or from getting into a gray out situation, and I've experienced this, it is really scary. The first thing that starts happening is your vision starts closing in from here, and it sort of comes in like this. And the moment it closes up entirely, you're out. And then when the G force lifts, you're back, usually conscious. But to get back to the G suit, the torso and the G suit on your legs, it inflates with air as the jet pulls G forces, as the pilot puts the aircraft in maneuvers, right?
Hmm.
And that prevents blood from your head, uh, not sort of going towards your legs. So it physically compresses on your torso and on your legs to restrict the amount of blood flowing from the top below. So if there is more blood over here and in your head, the chances of a gray out, ultimately becoming a blackout, are reduced. Now, that's in the case of a positive G. There's something called a negative G, and that's a scenario you don't want to get into, um, which is why you will not find fighter aircraft fly like this. You will see them do turns like that.
Hmm.
But I won't get more technical than that. That is when blood rushes from your feet to your head, and because the nerves and the capillaries, rather, in your brain are far more delicate, they stand the possibility of actually bursting, and so your vision would become red if a negative G is applied in certain scenarios. So let's not talk about that scary stuff. But the G force does the same thing. It protects you from that as well. Blood rushing from your feet to your head.
My follow up is what is negative G? Is it when the fighter pilot uh, sort of does a dive down, like nose down?
No, it's not quite that. A positive G is when you build up G. There are certain maneuvers where you get into a negative G scenario, where it's the opposite of putting on
Hmm.
an X amount of body weight upon yourself. It's actually the negative of that,
Got it.
uh, right? And you can get into a lot of the science over there, but I think for the purpose of this conversation, that should be enough.
Interesting. So at some point, obviously, everyone in India hears about the horrific Pahalgam attack, and in a few days, we prepare a response. And like you read in the book, India chooses nine target sites. From that, there's about two specific primary target sites, which is the Bahawalpur HQ and the Markaz A Taiba.
The Bahawalpur and Murid, one is of the headquarters of the Lashkar-e-Toiba and one is the headquarters of the Jaish-e-Mohammed.
Hmm.
Those were the two targets which were struck by the Indian Air Force in the early hours of the 7th of May. So those were the main targets as far as the Indian Air Force was concerned. There were more targets which the Indian Air Force, which the Indian Army hit. In fact, many more targets, but those were shallow targets just across the line of control. So, whereas the Indian Air Force's targets needed greater weight of attack, which is why they actually went in and they conducted these operations.
While all this was happening, did we have intelligence that these headquarters very much exist? Were we waiting for a legitimate reason to hit them? Or were we able to then gather in intelligence after the attack?
No, we knew that these were the headquarters of the Jaish-e-Mohammed and the Lashkar-e-Toiba and various terrorist groups affiliated with them. We've known this for years, if not decades. What usually happens in the case of the terror infrastructure in Pakistan is that these are headquarters, and these are all associated with some of the worst offenders, the biggest terrorist leaders that Pakistan has produced. And then there are forward operating sort of bases in a sense, or terror camps which are set up, which are closer to the line of control. And these are often the points of infiltration used by terrorists to attempt to come across. And that's the fight that we fight on the line of control. What India did during Op Sindoor, which was as a result of the horrific Pahalgam terror attack, was to send a message to Pakistan, or attempt to send a message to Pakistan, making it absolutely clear that we will strike the heart of terror in Pakistan. And two of the targets over here in Bahawalpur and in Muridke were very much a part of that. Also, the strike on Bahawalpur is particularly significant because it was a deeper strike in terms of how far away from the Rajasthan-Punjab border it was than any other attack India has conducted since the 1971 war. So several hundred kilometers across. Again, the message being this is no longer just about a fight along the line of control on either side of it. We will take this battle deep into Pakistan, which is what we did.
Uh, why does the government keep saying Operation Sindoor is still ongoing?
So the government has not shut down Operation Sindoor at all. And India retains its right to strike if there is another terrorist incident. Now, there was the Red Fort terror incident. In fact, I covered the Red Fort terror incident. I was on the ground covering it for hours and hours through the night, the day, whatever. And then there were questions which were asked. Here was a government which said that, look, if there is another serious terror attack, then we are going to uh, restart Op Sindoor. It's not over, and we can carry out strikes at any stage. But the fact of the matter is, there's one thing about politicians saying that, I mean, we'll keep hitting you or whatever it is. But to militarily go ahead and do that is something completely different. That said, it is an attack, if ever it happens, sort of to retaliate for the Red Fort attacks. Anything that we do will be at a time and place of our choosing. And the assumption shouldn't at all be that it would be airstrikes in the manner that we saw during Op Sindoor. It could be something else. It could be something covert. It could be something that's already happened, which you and I are not aware of.
I guess the most polarizing issue during Operation Sindoor was conflicting stories about how many jets on our side were downed, where the Americans would say one thing, the French would say another, Pakistanis would say something else. And in that, it was
The
very
Pakistani claim keeps going up.
right.
I think it's safe to say it's not that, whichever number, even the most modest number.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Um, but the confusion and perhaps the deliberate hiding of our jets being felled, and I spoke to several people inside our defense journalist world, and they all had different things to say. Some even said that for national security's sake, one has to hide certain things and maintain strong narratives back at home because public morale is also as important as victories. But now that it's been almost a year since Operation Sindoor, what is the actual real number?
So I don't know the actual real number because they won't talk about it. But I think it's important to understand that, in as much as it is the birthright in our country of any journalist to be asking these questions on losses, there is a very real argument given by the government on why they don't want to talk about losses. In fact, Air Marshal Tiwari, in at my book launch yesterday, went into a great deal of detail. And what this book actually has is uh, the most categorical, specific explanation on why the Indian Air Force doesn't want to talk about specific losses. But before I actually read out a paragraph on that, because I think it's a very relevant question, I think it's important to also look at what other nations do. Now, this isn't to justify the lack of information from the Indian Air Force or what may be perceived and is perceived often as a lack of transparency. I am merely stating what the facts are. America has been hit very hard in the war in West Asia. Several surface to air missile radar systems affiliated with the THAAD missile surface to air missile system, which is an interceptor missile system. It's designed to intercept ballistic missiles, have been destroyed by the Iranians. In the initial phases of the war, there was just a little bit of satellite imagery which emerged, which showed that these were actually destroyed or very seriously damaged. Has there been any commentary from the US confirming that? No. What about all of the attacks on American bases in Kuwait or in Qatar? Uh, the fact that an AWACS aircraft was actually destroyed on the ground, at least one, in one of their frontline bases. What about damages to various facilities in all of these bases? Again, a limited amount of satellite, data pictures have emerged from Iranian sources. Uh, it's a fact. The Americans haven't denied it, right? And so you do not talk about losses, whether it's on the ground or in the air, unless there are particular circumstances. For example, if an airman or a pilot has had to eject, if a fighter aircraft has been lost in combat, then those are particular circumstances in which you choose to actually speak. So when there were three friendly F-15s downed during friendly fire in Kuwait, the Americans said yes, that did happen. So it's not that they denied that. It was actually being filmed by social media. There was nothing left to deny. But there is a lot which air forces do not want to talk about. And they certainly don't want to talk about losses during conflict because, it's a perception game. And it's also one where you don't want your enemy to know about your exact strength. So in the case of Sindoor, this is what Air Marshal Tiwari, who was then vice chief, says. No country in the world gives you an official confirmation of losses. You give me one example, he said. Anything we say either confirms or denies the claims the adversary has been talking of, and we don't want to do either. In long range engagements, there is always that element of doubt. Have you hit or not hit? Confirming either way would be an advantage to your adversary. The same thing is true of them. They've not confirmed any of their losses. It's talking about Pakistan. Nobody seems to be asking them. Pakistan is building a narrative which they are comfortable with, and our people tend to fall into that trap. If you go back in history, in World War II, between the US and the UK, they lost more than twice the number of aircraft as the Luftwaffe, yet they came out victorious. They lost almost 150,000 aircraft, 150,000 in the Second World War. The aggressor always has losses because he goes in harm's way. The PAF has always had a defensive mindset. For us, the primacy of the Air Force is the strike force. And that's what we did on the 7th. We struck on the ground. Therefore, when you go into harm's way, there will be damage and losses. The numbers are definitely much lower than what Pakistan's claimed, but we don't want to give official confirmations. That's our stand, and it remains consistent. Pakistan has suffered heavy losses on the ground, which it won't talk about. I think that's a reasonable explanation. It's not what people in our country want, but I would sort of submit before we can move on with something else that an India-Pakistan war is not a T20 match about hits or sixes where we've hit them on the ground or taken out one of their planes, or of losses that we've lost or a wicket gir gaya. Chakka mara ya wicket gir gaya. You don't look at it like that. This was an unbelievably serious situation. And I would say, thank heavens it ended in 88 hours. And in fact, a little bit more than that, a couple of days by the time it actually ended. Because it was very, very serious. It was very, very real. And thank heavens that the loss of life was still relatively minor, right? In the densely packed subcontinent, a war can get completely out of hand. We don't want mass fatality events, do we? And therefore, I'm glad it ended when it did. But to your point on losses and the point that I was trying to make, it's not a 20 over match. It's very, very serious. So for, let's not deny that losses will happen. Losses happen. It's always factored in. I mean, look at the losses America sustained against Iran, which was not seen to be a military threat against them. They're still around. They're still fighting.
Yeah, as of right now, they've just struck Kharg Island.
America has struck Kharg
Yeah,
Island,
yeah,
yes,
yeah.
but not the docks or the piers at this
Hmm.
stage. That's where the ships from Kharg Island actually pick up Iranian oil, and therefore these are attacks on radars and military infrastructure on Kharg. But given the threats that we've seen from the United States, who knows what's going to lie ahead?
Yeah. Which reminds me, I guess many people, I was born in 97 and you were already 25 in 99. But when I was born in 97, I I cannot reasonably say that I have any memory of the Kargil War because I couldn't develop memories. And in my lifetime, I've been subject to bomb blasts in Delhi. I've I've certainly been in front of the TV when 26/11 happened. But when you have drone strikes and even possible air damage from Pakistan, what I did notice this time around was videos circulating from Pathankot and other parts of Punjab where I think there was some drone damage of people hiding, and thankfully no life was lost. But what kind of readiness does the Air Force? Is there like a directive from the Air Force or the Army to its citizens and also to its own personnel if they know that they're bound to be hit or there could be a possible hit? How do they protect themselves?
Well, there are bunkers that gives you a basic line of protection in all bases. There are hardened areas. You've got hard shelters for aircraft as well.
Mhm.
And so those are optimally used very often and usually, in fact, even during peacetime. But there is an advanced sort of warning system which is available. You rely on intelligence to see if the enemy, either our northern or our western enemy, is on the verge of attack. If there are signs that they are doing something, then on the basis of that, you start to move. You move your aircraft to other bases, or you get ready. You fly combat air patrols. But frankly, the people in the air force, and even if there are civilians, because our air bases are mini cities,
Mhm.
I mean, they are relatively protected. I mean, there are bunkers which presumably are available. But what about our citizens? We aren't protected like Israel and its nationals, where there is a bunker behind or a hardened area inside virtually every house where you can go and take shelter. That becomes a huge problem for us, which is why we don't want a mass fatality event. And thank heavens, as I said before, that contrary to people who keep saying that, oh no, no, why did we stop, we should have kept going. I've spent a career covering war and conflict. I've covered Kargil, I've covered Congo, I've covered Iraq, I've covered Afghanistan. I've done 3 stints in Ukraine, and natural disasters, which in a sense very similar when you report to actual war. And there is nothing that you can prepare you for what you see, which is why, for the benefit of experience, I can say that the last thing that we want is a war that gets out of control, like
Mhm.
what is happening in West Asia.
What's the most fucked up war you've seen? Congo?
That's a really tough situation, and I think in many senses, the Ukraine conflict was really something. It was difficult. I've been to areas where Russian forces were retreating. I've spoken to women who say that their relatives were raped. These were areas which were very heavily mined. We were walking through those areas to sort of get to the other side. I've seen a great deal of that devastation taking place over there on the ground. And that was in the first phase of the war, which was absolutely crazy. The toughest assignment for me, 1.5 months on the ground, was Afghanistan in
Wow.
2001, where we drove from Dushanbe in Tajikistan, crossed the Amu Darya River, got into Afghanistan to a place called Khojabauddin, drove up the Anjuman Pass, which is 14,000 feet high on virtual donkey tracks in Soviet-made jeeps, and then managed to ultimately get to the Panjshir Valley. And through the Panjshir Valley, I was sick as a dog. to beyond the Panjshir Valley to the outskirts of Kabul. And then my colleague Ajay Shukla was actually able to be there when the first, Northern Alliance soldiers went in and Kabul was liberated. But that entire experience was horrific for me. It was really, really physically draining. So I've seen all of this, and I could go on with various stories. But in as much as I mean, war and covering natural disasters are, two sides of the same coin. And you see, I mean, human devastation similarly in covering natural disasters as well.
Mm. Perhaps this is a simple question, but have you ever been in the line of sight of a gun? Have you ever directly
Yeah.
several
Well, I'm
times?
I'm lucky to have survived a couple of occasions. Right after the Kargil War, um, there was a Pakistan Air Force Atlantic aircraft, which was shot down by the Indian Air Force in the north of Gujarat, in the Sir Creek area. And as it turned out, and I think more than a dozen Pakistani naval aviators were killed in that. There's a MiG-21 which carried out that interception. The aircraft had come well within Indian airspace. So the day after, I was on an Indian Air Force helicopter along with a group of journalists, where the Indian Air Force was taking us to the area where we could see the wreckage of that aircraft on the ground. It was very close to the international border in that area. And as we were approaching, there were three helicopters that we were going in, Indian media and the international media. I was in the last helicopter, and I've written about this extensively, which was the oldest Mi-8 helicopter at the time in service with the Indian Air Force.
Hmm.
They had a massive fuel tank, a drum right in the middle of the cabin. So that gives you an idea of how basic it was. The rear clamshell doors were forced shut. I mean, it never opened because it was just too old. And then the helicopter just banked and dived right down and sped away. And I thought when it was, and the journalists sitting around all laughing, ha 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 ha. And I realized as somebody who understands aviation that there's something terribly wrong. So I went to the crew member just outside the cockpit and I said, "What's wrong?" And sort of he pointed his head in and said, "What's wrong? What's wrong? What's wrong?" And one of the pilots said, "Suspected missile." Right? And we landed, and then we went back to Nalia, and the we got off that helicopter. And to cut a long story short, the Pakistanis had fired either a Swedish-made RBS missile at us or a Stinger missile at us at our formation, and um, that missed us. So I survived that missile strike. I then, over a period of time in covering the conflict in Congo, actually came across the pilot who was in that helicopter of ours, who was the pilot commanding in that helicopter. And he said he was the one who spotted it. It was to his, I think, 3 o'clock or 1 o'clock to his right, essentially. He called in the suspected missile launch, and he saw the explosion as well in the sky. He radioed in the others, and all three of us sort of sped away. That was one. But just before that, I think a couple of months, uh, when you're young and entirely stupid and wanting to be a part of the action. I was sitting on, I was standing on the banks of the Suru River in Kargil, and across the river, I was in front of the brigade headquarters. Across the river, there's a hillside, and on top of that hill is an All India radio transmitter. And for days and days, the Pakistanis were attacking that with artillery shelling and three-round volleys. So boom, 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 and each time missing it. So some stupid reason, I believed in my head that, the artillery shelling which was taking place was just on the other side. And so if I was on this side,
Hmm.
I would be safe. And whereas I'm not going to be on that side, and if I was, then it would be dangerous. And this is where the tower was, right up over here. So I got into my black ambassador with my camera person, Manvendra Gautam, and we drove across the bridge and we went up, and the driver was freaking out, saying that ये क्या कर रहे हो आप पागल लोग हो, and this that the other, and we were sort of goading each other, चले हाँ क्यों नहीं यार, क्या 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 हो गया है? नहीं नहीं यार अब बस करते नहीं यार क्यों हो गया ना, नहीं 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 नहीं, और चलो तुम, मैं बस ऐसे ही बोल रहा था, चलो चल. So I mean, this is just daft stupidity, and we got out of our car because at one place the driver stopped the car, and then we clambered our way up that khud side, and we must have been about 100 150 meters 150 meters away from the AIR tower when boom, right in front of our eyes for the very first time and on camera, it blows up. There's a direct hit on it. And then there is the second volley and the third volley. And what I felt then was the searing heat coming at my face, right? And then you hear the sound. And that's the way it works. It actually explodes first, it hits first, and then you hear the sound. That's the science of it. And then, of course, our great courage, Paramveer Chakra winning courage, disappeared. We got on our backsides, heavy tripod camera, and just slid down that hill, got to the road, and our taxi had disappeared. The guy had gone, right? And so here was Manvendra and me. And those days, our camera tripods were heavy as hell. I mean, they were insanely heavy. And we had those big cameras. So I had the tripod like this. He had the camera, and we were running down like this, and then the road curves. And we must have run maybe 150 meters. And right in front of us, the police have stopped, uh, a convoy of oil tankers. All
Uh-huh.
right, the last thing you want in that situation. And our taxi was actually right in the middle of those oil tankers. And so we managed to get to the taxi guy. We were too scared to say anything. So we just got out of there and got out of that situation. It was pretty gnarly. And I remember looking at my jeans, and my jeans were sort of torn in one place. And I'm thinking to myself, it's not when I was on my bum sort of getting down, it was sort of on the knee. So how the hell did that happen? And I keep wondering, was that shrapnel or something like that? Who knows?
That is insane. I mean, I've only seen war reporters in movies. I've just never come across one that has lived long enough to tell the tale. And I'm very surprised to see that people like that there is that sense of bravado that can, almost end your life. Well, I'm glad you're
Yeah,
here. I'm
so I
glad
mean,
you,
I'm not
yeah.
as stupid as I was then, and I don't look forward to covering war and these assignments anymore. With age comes wisdom, and I think a sense of survival which sort of grows.
Well, let's talk about some of the wisdom that I've gathered from your book. Uh, there's this underground room where the node commander sits during Operation Sindoor. That was quite interesting that this gentleman was on several caffeine pills, monitoring the operation, and barely had any sleep. Um, I mean, just take me through the background of that interview because for me, an underground site that no one knows about that has an integrated camera system that's monitoring every facet of the war. What was happening there?
So let me read to you because it's a fascinating story.
Sure.
On the 6th of May, less than 5 hours before the Indian Air Force and Indian Army launched their strikes on the Pakistani terror targets, the commander of an integrated air command and control system was at a birthday party. Okay. Here we are about to go to war, and this IACCS, Integrated Air Command and Control System commander, a very senior officer, was at a birthday party. The node commander, in other words, he commanded a node of the IACCS, there are many such nodes, was an experienced combat specialist who had commanded a fighter squadron, among other things. A young flying officer under his command had just turned 23, as young as you, most likely. And the room felt like any other off duty evening. Cake, jokes, the sense of a normal day clocking out. Little did the men and women at this party know that the Indian Air Force was about to go to war and that their unit would be in the thick of action. The node commander was the man who stood between a glowing screen and the weapons that could reach across hundreds of kilometers. He commanded one of the IAF's IACCS nodes, a state of the art, highly automated brain hidden in an underground facility. One of many in service, this node was part of a national grid watching every inch of the air picture, military and civilian, and sweeping far beyond India's borders when required. It ensures seamless sharing of information, not only to the Indian Air Force's operations centers, but if required, also the Navy and Army units. So this is, think of this as a massive room. It's underground, which is because it's protected. And there are many of these nodes across the country. and they've got on gigantic screens in front of them, they've got sensor data coming in from AWACS aircraft, from our ground-based sensors, radars, from aircraft in the air, and they're monitoring what is happening in Pakistan and over our airspace as well. And so it was these IACCS nodes that actually conducted the war. When a particular unit, in terms of a surface to air missile unit or a particular formation of aircraft, was told to strike, it was because one of the IACCS nodes instructed them to do that. Now, obviously, who gave the final order is separate. I mean, that's all classified.
Mhm.
But it was on the basis of decision reached by the IACCS nodes, uh, which was coordinating the fight, that it all went in. And when we were under attack, it was the IACCS nodes that responded.
Yeah, yeah, I found that to be uh, extremely exciting in the book. In fact, one other passage that I found exciting, and perhaps you could read it directly, is your conversation with Group Captain Kunal Kalre,
Kalra,
Kalra,
Kalra.
Kunal Kalra, who had fired the BrahMos missile, and it's quite poetic how he describes that.
So Kalra didn't fire. He he uh, he may or may not have fired the BrahMos missile. I can't tell you.
Hmm.
But if you look carefully at his account, there were two missiles which were fired.
Hmm.
And so the possibility of it being a BrahMos doesn't exist. The Air Force till date has never told us about which weapon was used on which target. Now, I
Got it.
know because I sort of figured it out, but whether it was a BrahMos or not, let's not get into that. But as I mentioned, there were two missiles over there. The Su-30 of the Indian Air Force can carry only one BrahMos. It's a gigantic, gigantic weapon.
Hmm.
I can tell you about Kaldra, or if you like, since you are interested in uh, the BrahMos, I can tell you about a BrahMos, all right, from one
Sure.
occasion. This was Group Captain Bhatia. Alongside the Rafales flew the Sukhois armed with their supersonic BrahMos. Group Captain Manav Bhatia was leading one of those squadrons. His co-pilot sitting in the front of the plane was one of the youngest of his pilots, an enthusiastic 27-year-old fighter pilot. They'd already gone through what was expected in the sortie four times, both in the cockpit and before that in the briefing room. So Bhatia was in the back, right, as weapon systems operator. The youngster was in front. So when the operation was underway, things were happening automatically. There was beautiful synergy, Bhatia says. This was a mission without any radio calls. There were no external radio transmission calls which were given, not even one. It was dark. Every light that you saw from the west made you wonder, is that an enemy surface to air missile launch? We were talking between the front and rear cockpits. Me in the rear, my co pilot up front. What's that? No, 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 relax. It's nothing. It's a star. Right. So Bhatia had decided earlier that when the time would come to launch the missile, he would give his youngster a chance. He'd had 20 years of service. Now he wanted to give the young man sitting along with him the kick of the trigger press. I could see the confidence building up in him. The plan was working out. The long range NO-11M BARS radar on a Su-30 MKI was picking up tracks of PAF jets across the Indo-Pak boundary. There were dozens of jets in the air. The possibility of the enemy launching was very real. Equally real was the threat of being picked up by radars of Pakistan's Chinese built HQ-9 missile system. Bhatia's radar warning receiver was picking up attempts by Pakistani radar to track his aircraft. Lock on was there, he says, but he also knew they were relatively safe and outside lethal threat range. When we turn towards the final launch aspect, the last few seconds, that is the time I felt that all I needed to do was to fold my hands and say to myself, Ab kar lega ye. He will now manage. Bhatia says the guy in front, the youngster, was ready. I gave the call. You're cleared for firing. He said, ready to launch. I said, okay, launch. And he said, pressing trigger. And all these months later, the feeling of launching the deadly BrahMos remains vivid to Bhatia. The BrahMos is a beautiful weapon when it leaves your aircraft. It's like a sunrise in the middle of the night.
Wow. How difficult was it to get these men to open up and talk about these intimate details about Operation Sindoor?
Well, it went through an entire process. I wrote to the Air Force. I mean, I've worked very closely with the Air Force for all these decades. They agree with me, they disagree with me, they sort of pat me on my back, and then they shoot me down as well. And that's the way it works with as a journalist, and that's the way it should always work. But so I wrote to them, and then they talked, they spoke, and then they didn't take a decision, and then they finally did. And they said, no, Vishnu, you've got a great idea. And my idea is that I didn't want a macro level book looking at Op Sindhu. I mean, that'd be dreadfully boring. What
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to do was to locate the accounts of the Indian Air Force's war fighters within that matrix of what we already know.
Right.
And so this has interviews with, I think, a dozen plus Indian Air Force officers, warfighters, surface to air missile commander, S-400, station commanders, Akash surface to air missile commanders, fighter pilots, IACCS node commanders, the vice chief of the Air Force, the director general of air operations. I mean, all of them. The chief of the Western Air Staff, the Western Air Command, the commander in chief of the Western Air Command, which was the command which was actually fighting this battle, and so many others. Um, and I mean, there was no restriction on what I could ask, but obviously the book went through its checks and balances. I mean, it was reviewed, and there were parts which the Air Force wasn't. I mean, several which the Air Force wasn't comfortable with. But rather than tell me ki nahi hoga, they sat with me and we worked out what could work. And in many cases, it was just a question of rephrasing something which they were comfortable with and I was comfortable with. I dealt with some excellent officers in the Air Force who really worked. And, I mean, by the grace of God, I didn't encounter somebody who said, yeah, nahi hone wala hai. Chodo isko. I don't want to take this on.
Mm.
They were all like, no, 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 we want to take this on and we want to get this going. Yeah, isko tum fix karo. Listen to what we are saying. And I'm like, no, no, I'm with you. And we figure out stuff.
Why do you think the Air Force is is eager to tell this side of the story, even though if it's through you as a conduit, when declassifying important information about the operation could actually give away vital information? And
Great question.
where was this quote unquote narrative when the operation was actually underway?
No, so what I made clear to the Air Force when I spoke to them and I speak to them is that, look, this entire narrative building process is your business. I am not in the business of projecting your narrative. If what I write helps that, that's your thing. But my purpose in writing this book is
Mm-hmm.
because the facts stated on the basis of satellite imagery, which I've been able to collect of the Indian Air Force's hits, make the facts as stated by you absolutely correct. This being the case, it makes me want to write these stories. But to answer your question directly, Op Sindoor is classified. So and it will be for years and years. So this book skirts on the edges and sort of pushes wherever I tried, and I tried very hard to get some information out, which they were willing to actually share. And so when we talk about what is classified and what is not, um, I mean, the radar signatures of particular aircraft, the frequencies in which communications take place, the frequencies in which fire control radars operate, the actual deployment of particular units on the ground, all of that is classified. More than anything else, perhaps the tactics, the training, all of that. That's not that. I mean, the book doesn't get into that, but it sort of uh, it describes events around all of those. I mean, you can't talk about a fighter pilot flying to launch his missile without getting into, without understanding that it's based on the tactics which they've been trained in and which, a lot of which cannot be revealed.
Got it. Um, During Operation Sindoor, the S-400 was mentioned several times.
Yeah.
Um, and people were quite amazed by how well it works. So, since you talk about it in the book, I would just want you to describe a little bit what it is, why it's spectacular. I understand that it helps to intercept missiles,
Yeah.
and I have historically heard about the Iron Dome as the global standard for missile interception, but it seems to me that the S-400 has managed to trump that.
So the Iron Dome refers to people use it to refer to the entire Israeli air defense, their missile shield. But in fact, it's only a small part of that. The way it works for the Israelis is there's something called the Iron Beam. That's a laser-based defensive system. Then there is the Iron Dome, which is a surface-to-air missile system, short range, takes out rockets. After that, there's something called David Sling, which fires a missile called the Stunner. And after that, there are Patriot surface-to-air missile systems,
Uh-huh.
which are American-built, but plug into the Israeli system. And then ultimately, the Arrow surface-to-air missile system, which is very long range, and it has two variants. There is an endo and exo-atmospheric interceptor. In other words, you intercept ballistic missiles in the atmosphere and some in space. And then, of course, in the case of what's happening in West Asia, you've got American destroyers out in the Mediterranean plugging in their own surface to air missiles, SM series missiles, to give the Israelis additional cover. In the case of India, we also have that. And we use our own missiles, but missiles which are equally effective, I would suggest. We have our own endo and exo atmospheric interceptors that, as I understand it, is not fully developed. It's still a ways away from being developed. And even if it is developed and deployed, you and I won't hear about it. Um, and that's for ultra long range threats. In the case of Pakistan, the S-400, which has a robust capability of intercepting incoming ballistic missiles and missiles like the CM-400, which were fired by Pakistani aircraft and which are very fast, that was taken care of by the S-400. Beneath that, we've got something called the MR-SAM, which is Israeli design. Beneath that, we've got something called the Akash surface-to-air missile, which is ours. Then we've got Spider, which is again a shorter range, which is Israeli. Then we've got legacy surface-to-air missile systems, which are of Russian origin, which have been upgraded, the Pechora and the like. So that's India's missile defense sort of shield, as it were.
Hmm.
Several missile systems, but in this book, the S-400 was certainly the star. It was able to ward off Pakistani CM-400 missile attacks. They were trying to attack the S-400 unit. The S-400 knocked out at a range of 314 kilometers a Pakistani AWACS platform, or it could have been an electronic intelligence aircraft, which is the longest surface-to-air missile kill believed to have taken place in military history thus far, which makes it an incredible, incredible operation. On day one, it also took out a Pakistani JF-17 fighter more than 200 kilometers away. And it was, we never shot down any Pakistani aircraft using fighter jets. We only used surface to air missile systems. And as I understand it, all, if not most, were done by the S-400 unit.
Wonderful. Um, I guess one of my final questions is about, since it's going to take a long time for Operation Sindoor to be declassified, um, till then, if one were to sort of understand what is the total victory or loss that we have achieved from this. I mean, we've hit some of their nuclear sites, some of their nuclear bases.
So they've neither confirmed nor denied that. We have hit their air bases very heavily.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. We've done that. We've sort of hampered them from a military standpoint, but they also seem to have gained diplomatically. They've asked to mediate between America and Iran, and they certainly seem to they try to attempt to sideline India in diplomatic conferences wherever those happen. What's the long term victory of this? Have we been able to successfully avenge what happened in Pahalgam?
Yes, I do. In the two parts of your question, as far as Pakistan's diplomatic efforts to bring an end to the Gulf War, I would suggest that I don't care if it's Pakistan or China or anyone else, as long as that war comes to an end, it benefits you and me and 1.4 billion Indians. It is critical for that war to end. If Pakistan has the buttons which work to get Iran and America to actually work out a ceasefire, that's brilliant. And therefore, the nationalistic play that we see over here about Pakistan is useless, they aren't really achieving anything, versus, oh, where is our foreign policy when Pakistan is doing this, that, and the other. It doesn't apply to me at all. We are in the middle of an unmitigated crisis. Whoever ends that, great, right? Our
Hmm.
foreign policy cannot be judged on the basis of what Pakistan is doing. We do a lot more. But what Pakistan may or may not be doing now, successfully or unsuccessfully, thus far we don't know, is absolutely critical. And let's be realistic about that. That said, again, I mean, foreign policy isn't a T20 match. We are not negotiating, therefore we are the loser. It's a bit more complicated than that.
Sure.
But to answer your question, I do believe that we gave Pakistan's leadership a resounding explanation on what we would do if they hit us, in terms of terrorist attacks. So when they struck us with terrorist attacks, we struck right back, hitting Murid ke Bahalpur and many other sites which the Indian Army struck. When they responded militarily, we hammered them. If you just take a look at what we did on the 10th, and that really is key, because we were very much on the ascendancy on the 10th, which is when they decided to come to the ceasefire table, right?
Hmm.
On the 10th, if you look at it, I mean, there was a back and forth taking place before that. But on the 10th of May, between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m., we hit their bases. These are massive Pakistani air bases at Chaklala, Rahawali, Rafiki, Raimiar Khan, Sakkar, Murid, and Naya Chor. We attacked them with missiles. This book actually has those satellite images, right, which was key to my journalism during Op Sindoor. These attacks took place between 2 to 5 a.m. And then between 10 and 12, we hit Sargoda, Bulari, and Jacobabad, right? And we shot down an AWACS plane of theirs as well. At 3:35 p.m., their Director General of Military Operations called up our DGMO and said, "Ki bas bahut hua hai, let's get back onto a ceasefire conversation." This was the same DGMO of Pakistan who, on the 7th, when we told them that we've hit our terror targets and we don't want any more, said, "Ki now you had it. Now we will reply." That same guy came back and said, "No, no, no, that's fine. We accept the terms of the ceasefire, and we will start it in 2 hours." It doesn't get better.
Yeah. Um, and despite that, despite the ceasefire, they still had some uh,
It went
infrequent
on for
firing.
about 48 hours, and it left many of us who were at by then so tired, because we were in the studio day in and day out, not changing our clothes. That यार अब ceasefire हो गया यार, बंद करो ये सब, घर जाना है, सोना है हमें. But it
Mm.
went on for 48 hours, and at one stage it led me to believe that, who is controlling the Pakistani military? Who is authorizing continuing strikes across the LC or the IB in places? And of course, if they attack, then we attack, and it continues. But eventually they stop. And thank heavens they did. Otherwise, the Indian Air Force was in a mood to strike much harder. In fact, when the ceasefire was called, we had fighters in the air which were going to strike other targets. And they had to abort their missions with the jets already in the air. Um, you know, so we were ready to act. The IF was very much on the ascendancy on the 10th, very much so.
Well, Vishnu, I want to thank you for your time. Thank you for this comprehensive book. The back says it's the authoritative account of IAF operations during Operation Sindoor. If people actually go ahead, buy the book, and read it, they will understand the precision and detail with which you've written everything in the book. There were lots of words I had to look up. It just shows that you're a bona fide nerd
Absolutely.
when it comes to aviation language. But that is good because what I really enjoyed about this book is zero hubris, zero vitriol, and zero exaggeration. It's rare that I can say that for many books that I read. It's a lot of dismissive grand statements that don't really add up to anything. This was very, very tactical, and I'm glad I was able to read it. People can buy this on Juggernaut on Amazon. And yeah,
Yeah,
thank you
you
for your
just need
time.
to type Vishnu Som book, SOM.
Hmm.
Let me plug my book now. You may as well. And go ahead and buy it off Amazon. If you don't want to do that, you can buy it in a big bookstore near you. But it's doing well. It's a number one bestseller in many categories, in fact. And I invite your readers to read this as well.
Amazing. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Vinamre, it's been great speaking to you.
Thank you.